Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing extremely well. I'm reaching you from San Francisco, the home of startups.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for taking this time on a Saturday, no less, to have this conversation with me. Very much appreciated. And I know you have a little bit of a time clock, so I'll just jump right in if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So, one thing I thought might be helpful is just to sort of get us going is what led you to coaching? What about coaching sort of got you involved and was like, this is something I want to do?
Absolutely. So, about 10 years ago, I was a dev manager, and I was a really bad dev manager.
Okay.
So, I started looking for ways to be better, and I discovered Agile, Scrum in particular. So, I got my certified Scrum Master certification, and I converted my teams to Scrum. And then it was written up in the company newsletter, and the heads of other business units called me in to start doing work with their teams. And I was working at a defense contractor, which I decided wasn't the ideal place to do Scrum in at that time. Things have changed enormously over the last 10 years, but at that time it was not a great place to do Agile. And so I decided to become an independent consultant in 2009.
Okay. All right. So, when you think about a Scrum Master, what qualities is to your best sense should a Scrum Master demonstrate consistently? Like what should
Yeah.
a Scrum Master have as sort of the basic skill set?
So in terms of personal qualities, the two most important are courage and the ability to respond to stress gracefully. So Lisa Atkins, one of the top coaches of coaches in the world, says something like, if a Scrum Master isn't consistently worried about getting fired, they're not doing their jobs to the best of their ability. Right? The job of a Scrum Master is to change the organization and improve the organization. And the organization is going to resist. I like to say that the people on top of the world are unlikely to change it. So the CEO, the vice presidents, the senior vice presidents are very happy where they are. And they are very comfortable with all sorts of dysfunction. And it's the job of the Scrum Master to highlight that dysfunction. So courage and the ability to respond to stress.
Okay, got it. So with that, do you, just as a follow up, the idea of Scrum Masters, I know sometimes there's the concept of Scrum Master and Agile Coach. Do you look at those as similar, different roles? Do you make no distinction between them whatsoever?
Yes. So a Scrum Master is an Agile coach of one team. So some people might call that a junior Scrum Master or less junior Agile coach or less experienced Agile coach. It's just a Scrum Master is the Agile coach of one team. And in fact, at Spotify, they actually made that exact transition. They used to have Scrum Masters, and they basically stopped calling them Scrum Masters one day and called them Agile coaches. So that's the relationship between Scrum Master and Agile coach.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so what advice would you give to a new Scrum Master to polish their confidence? Meaning, if you're a new Scrum Master, sometimes you have the idea, and I'll say certainly I did, the idea that, how do I know I'm doing stand-up right? I mean, everyone can ask the three questions, you can ask them rote and get that out there, and then retrospectives, you can throw up a bunch of stickies and, talk about it. But how do you know, and how do you coach people?
Yeah, absolutely. So, certainly when I started out, my understanding of what it meant to be a coach, what it meant to be a Scrum Master is completely different from what it is now. So I like to focus on three things: relationships, system of work, and outcomes. So the first question is, what is my relationship with the people that I'm working with? And if my relationship is strong, if there's trust, if there's safety, then that's something that will give me confidence. The second is the system of work. Are the people that I'm working with examining their system of work? Do they care as much about how they work as the work itself? That's a key idea. And are they running experiments to see if they can improve their system of work? If that's happening, then my confidence increases. And then finally, outcomes, business outcomes, right? Am I building products that customers love? If that's happening, if things are getting better from a business perspective, then that also gives me confidence. So relationships, system of work, and business outcomes.
Okay, so not everyday easy things to get, but certainly easy to understand once you're getting close to them.
Yeah, and things to reflect upon and ponder. How is my relationship with this person? How's my relationship with myself? What are the last 3 experiments that we've done? What have we learned in the last month? How are we measuring business value? So these are all questions that can be used to drive progress.
Okay, got it. All right, so I have something that I don't think is controversial, but I know there's been a lot of conversation about it, and this is the idea of when planning, right? The idea of using velocity, cycle time, no estimates. There's a perspective on when to do any one of the three. Some people are very much, and talking to another coach, the idea that Scrum's kind of like a religion. So sometimes it's, hey, my religion says velocity. No, my religion says cycle time. No, my religion says let's do what's best for the team. If you're a Scrum Master and you're kind of new, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Where do you start to get a sense of what's the right first step to take, and then what does the journey kind of look like? What's your experience been?
So I think that's a very important question. So when I am coaching intermediate Scrum Masters, the key idea that I introduce to them is that they need to have a perspective, right? Their own personal view on questions like this one. So Scrum itself doesn't actually require velocity. Mm-hmm. It's a commonly used practice by Scrum teams, but it doesn't require velocity. And so the question is, what is the best practice to implement what it is that you're trying to implement? So there are some situations, right? Like when someone is doing a marketing campaign and the marketing folks want to know when the product is going to be done, where having some level of predictability and some estimate is really important. There are other places, and I would call these places like very advanced agile organizations, which literally do virtually no forecasting of any type, right? They simply are constantly working on what they believe is the highest value thing, and they're improving as much as possible. And that's it. And so there is no single general answer. It's a context-dependent answer. And so the responsibility of a Scrum Master is to become more and more familiar with various practices, and then be able to understand and help the team and the organization understand what best practice is in that particular context. The best practice for that organization, not the best practice in general.
Gotcha. So the idea would be, and I'll say, because I'm an analogy kind of guy, that it's kind of like having a large buffet, lots of options at the buffet, and knowing how to, I'll say, kind of like someone's grandmother, put together a plate that's like, oh, that's something that Michael's going to want to eat, versus, oh, Michael's not really into greens and kale and Brussels sprouts, so let's kind of figure out what kind of makes sense is in sort of a basic level. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, that's actually an excellent way of thinking about it, which is to think about what are the critical decisions that need to be made. For example, planning is a decision, and then what options are available. And as we get better and better as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, we get better and better at identifying decisions, tracking those decisions, and then we get better and better at options and explaining the options, coaching the options, tracking the options. And so that's a very clean way of understanding what the Scrum Master does, right? Identifies critical decisions and helps people identify options and analyze the options through things like experiments.
Gotcha. All right. So that's planning. So I got another one. When you think of retrospectives and stand-ups, how do you leave, if you're a Scrum Master, how do you leave, or what in your thought should you be thinking when you leave stand-up to know that was a quality stand-up, and then similarly for retrospective?
So to me, the ideal thing for the stand-up is to actually not be there, right? So the Scrum Master needs to make sure that the stand-up is happening if they're actually doing Scrum, but the Scrum Master doesn't actually need to be at the stand-up. Right? The stand-up is for the development team. And so one simple thing to look at is that the stand-up is about the flow of the work, not the work itself. So since you like analogies, let's say I'm buying a car. Mm-hmm. If I say I went to 3 dealerships, that's an example of the flow of the work. If I say I went to 3 dealerships, I drove the Chevy, I sort of like the Chevy, it's a red car, I'm having problems, Bill, will you help me out on this? Now I'm talking about the work itself. Right? So critically, the stand-up is about the flow of the work, not about the work itself. So that's a simple indicator.
Okay.
And then you asked about retrospectives.
Sure. Quick question, just for the sake of clarification. When you say that stand-up is just for the development team, are you saying the team that's working on the whole product, or are you saying just engineering? And by that I mean, like, if there's user experience folks, if there's engineering.
Right. Yeah. So I'm using the Scrum term of developer, where there are three roles, right? Scrum
Got it.
Master, Product Owner, and Developer. So developer would include everyone, including documentation folks, et cetera.
Got
Yes.
it.
Yeah. So retrospective. So the single biggest problem that I see with retrospectives is that people don't bring data into the retrospective to think about. And so you start off with this standard approach that many people start off with, which is, what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve? That's a great way to start, but the problem with it is that it relies too much on human memory.
Mm-hmm.
And human memory is extremely faulty. There are an enormous amount of cognitive biases that limit the effectiveness of the retrospective. One simple one is the recency bias. We remember what happened last week much, much better than happened last month.
Sure.
And so you see teams playing whack-a-mole, right? Like the last problem, they hit it, and then something else pops up and hit it. And really what you want to do is have a system level of understanding of everything that's going on and have empirical data behind it so that you can start really deeply analyzing the problems.
So what's one tip, trick?
Yes. So one simple tip is the 5 whys approach. Mm-hmm. And notice when you get to the deeper whys, how you're just hand waving. And then notice that, jeepers, when I get past level 1, I no longer have data and I'm just talking about opinions and feelings. So let me see if I can get to the second level. So simple example that just happened to me. There's standard run the business type of work, and there's feature-based work. And a director level manager, someone who manages hundreds of people, said to me, the problem is that we have everyone working on run the business stuff, and there isn't enough to go around to work on features, so the features never get done. So that's an opinion, right? What is the data? If we look over the last 6 months, how much RTB stuff work got done and how many features got done, right? We have to have a deep understanding. And of course, whenever you ask this question, it's almost always the case that the data doesn't actually exist. So you have to actually do hard work to find the data so that then you can think about it.
All right. Great. That's awesome. Thank you. All right. So another question for you. What advice would you give to organizations about how to evaluate Scrum Masters?
So I'll share with you a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, which are just unusual and unique, I think. So one of them is, how have you applied Agile or Scrum ideas to your own life? And so what's important to me here is that Scrum is not something that you put on when you get to work and take it off afterwards, right? It's a mindset.
Sure.
So if one has actually entered into that mindset, it permeates one's entire life. And so I'm looking for evidence of that. So I'll give myself as an example. So I'm a consultant, and I tend to gain a lot of weight while I'm on a consulting assignment because I'm eating, restaurant food the whole time. And so last year, about 18 months ago, I decided to do something about it. And so I went through some experimentation cycles to figure out what a good exercise routine and what a good diet was. And my body fat dropped from like 15% to 7.5%. And I have data, et cetera, behind it. So that's the sort of example that I'm looking for. It doesn't matter whether or not it's successful. The question is whether or not they're applying that mindset.
Sure, definitely.
The second thing is I always like to ask about any community service that they've done, either in the Agile community or outside, because that to me is sort of fundamental to the purpose-driven life of a Scrum Master or Agile coach, right? It's not about how much money can I make. At least I'm a little bit concerned if that's the only focus. It's also about contribution, right? And that's a key part of being a servant leader, right? It's not, Lisa Adkins again says that if a Scrum coach or Agile coach gets credit for 10% of the value that they provide, they're doing really well. And so people who are ego-driven are probably not ideal Scrum Masters or Agile coaches. So asking what contributions that they've made to further agility in the world is something that's really super valuable.
What advice would you give to anyone embarking on a transformation?
Yeah, so I'll share what I consider to be the 2 biggest problems that I encounter. The first one is that people don't know what Agile is. Okay. And when they find out what Agile is, they don't really want it.
Ooh, so I'm curious. What do they think Agile is? That's really piqued my interest.
Yeah, so many companies think of it as a process that gets installed by an expert. And so they view it as something like a management consultant would do, where a management consultant comes in, says, you're running your business incorrectly, here's the right way to run it. You should reorg, you should eliminate these positions and just get there as quickly as possible, right? That's revolutionary change. And so they expect an Agile coach to come in and install an Agile process.
What do you think they should think about in their own thought when they're thinking, okay, this is how I used to do it. It meant this, and now I'm doing this new thing. What should they sort of eliminate in their thinking to help them accelerate or to be better at being a Scrum Master?
I think that's an extremely difficult transition. The project managers that I've seen who are praised by the organization for being project managers have a few characteristics. Number one is that they have these extraordinary memories. Like they keep track of everything in the project. And so their job is actually when someone comes and asks them a question, they answer it.
Sure.
And I've actually seen project managers who have such good memories that they remember things that the people who actually did the work, the developers, don't remember. Okay. The second thing is that they tend to be very driven. Like, I'm going to drive this particular result, and it's my responsibility to fit in all of the pieces, right? This is like the traditional command and control project management part. And then the third thing, of course, is that they focus typically on schedule, scope, and budget.
Sure. Iron triangle, right?
Yeah. So all those three things, a Scrum Master is not doing any of those things, right? So if a Scrum Master gets asked a question about what the team is doing, a good response is go ask the team, right? So, and of course, they're not focused on schedule, scope, and budget, right? They're focused on the system of work, and the idea is that the system of work improves to improve value, right? Which is not the same thing as schedule, scope, and budget. So it's a radical change, right? From one thing to another. Now, if you wanted just to have one simple tip, one thing that I've seen that Scrum Masters really have a problem with is that they think it's their job to somehow get the team to do things, right? But they're not allowed to get them to do it by telling them, which is what they did as project managers. They're supposed to do things like ask powerful questions. And so the key thing there is that what matters is your intent. If you're still trying to get people to do stuff, it doesn't matter how you say it, you're still in project management world, right? So one thing I like to say is try to sense the energy of the team, and at the start, just support the team in getting them more of what they want. And so your skill there is in eliciting that information and listening very carefully to what they're saying, and then working in the team and in the organization. So that's, I think, a great place for a project manager to start.
Great. So, and so kind of like an analogy, a project manager would be kind of like a mom or a dad, right? Sort of like a parent.
Yes.
Or just a typical boss. But a Scrum Master is going to be, I'll say, kind of like a sensei.
Yeah, I like the metaphor gardener.
Okay.
So the Scrum Master is a gardener who sort of sets an environment that helps the team do its best work, right? So I can say that I've never met a Scrum Master who did something else who was a good Scrum Master. Now, I've seen people who are Scrum Masters of multiple teams, but they're Scrum Masters 100% of the time.
Okay.
And so I often tell this joke to managers. So I'm from Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, to become a massage therapist, you require 9 months of training and a state certification.
Yeah.
And so I say to them, do you think the Scrum Master position is more or less critical to your organization than that position of a massage therapist? Okay, well, that means 9 months of training and coaching and a certification at the end. Are you willing to make that sort of investment in your people? And if not, just understand that you're not going to have a Scrum Master. And if you're doing Scrum, you're not going to get the results that people report from doing Scrum because you're not doing it.
All right. What other closing remarks would you want someone to take away, just so that they're aware of, either what Agile is or isn't, what Scrum is or isn't?
Sure. So Agile works. So it's a huge growth industry, right? Everyone is going to move towards Agile. So it's a great place to be.
All right. Well, I think that does it.
Absolutely. Later.